My name is Kimberly Page. I'm 67 years old and I've lived in Springfield, Missouri most of my life. I've been a widow for 12 years now. My husband Harold passed away from a sudden heart attack. After that, Christmas became my responsibility. I was the one who kept the tradition alive. Every year, the house was decorated. The ham went in the oven, the pies cooled on the counter, and the table was set just like Harold and I used to do together. I always believed Christmas was supposed to be about peace, family, and the comfort of being together. At least that's what I tried to hold on to after he was gone. My daughter Sharon usually drives in from 2 hours away with her husband and kids. She brings a casserole or two, and she helps me finish setting the table. She's steady, dependable, and the kind of daughter you thank God for. But my son Louis and his wife Becky have made the holidays something I dread. For 3 years in a row, they've shown up late, started fights, and left everyone else walking on eggshells. What used to be a day of joy feels more like a storm I have to brace for. The first year it started, I thought maybe they were just stressed. Becky complained about the gifts. She said I hadn't spent enough on their children compared to Sharon's kids. She brought it up right at the table, her voice sharp, while the grandkids sat in silence. Louis didn't stop her. He actually joined in, saying, "Mom, it's not fair. You play favorites." I sat there with tears in my eyes, looking at the presents I had saved for on my small Social Security check, wondering how it had come to that. The second year was worse. Louis and Becky arrived 2 hours late without even calling. The food was already cold. Sharon tried to warm things back up in the oven, but by the time we sat down, everyone was cranky and tired. Then Louis brought up money. He asked me in front of everyone if I could lend them a few thousand. I said I couldn't, that I was on a fixed income. He pushed, and Becky muttered under her breath that I was stingy. Louis stood up, red in the face, and shouted that I'd rather spend on Sharon than help him out. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the wreath fell off. Christmas ended right there. The third year should have been my wake-up call, but I kept telling myself it was just family tension. That year, Becky started criticizing my cooking before she even sat down. She wrinkled her nose at the ham, saying it looked dry. She told the kids not to eat too much of the green bean casserole because it was too heavy. She even made fun of the pies, saying, "Oh, store-bought again." I'd spent hours baking them myself, crust and all. By dessert, she had packed up the kids and left without saying goodbye. I remember standing in the kitchen that night holding a sink full of dirty dishes and asking myself why I let it keep happening. Why did I keep inviting them, knowing what would come? The answer was simple: because I love my grandchildren. I couldn't stand the thought of them not being part of the day. I told myself I could handle the fights if it meant I still got to see their little faces on Christmas morning. But last year was the moment that broke something in me. I had set the table with my best dishes, the ones Harold and I bought when we first married. I had the ham roasted perfectly, the rolls buttered, the pies cooling. Sharon was there early, as always, helping me get everything ready. Doris, my neighbor, had stopped by with her famous cranberry salad. For a moment, I thought maybe this year would be calm. Then Louis and Becky arrived, nearly an hour late, and the tension walked in with them. Their voices were raised before they even reached the door. The grandkids looked embarrassed, staring at the floor. Sharon shot me a look across the table, the kind that says, "Here we go again." We tried to start dinner anyway. I passed the mashed potatoes. Sharon poured drinks. And I was just setting the pecan pie in the middle of the table when it happened. Louis slammed his fist down so hard the plates rattled. Becky was glaring at him, her voice sharp, accusing him of not helping enough at home. He turned it back on her, shouting that she was ungrateful. Then he looked at me and snapped, "And you always take her side. You've never been on mine." The sound of that fist on the table, the shock on the kids' faces, the way Sharon froze with her fork halfway to her mouth, it's all burned in my memory. That's when I realized I couldn't do this anymore. In that instant, as the plates settled and the pie shook on the table, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let my holidays be ruined for a fourth year in a row. I wasn't going to let their fights poison the one tradition that still connected me to my husband, to my faith, and to the joy I wanted to hold on to. I smiled weakly that night, trying to get us through the meal. But in my heart, I made a decision. This year would be different. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know what I would do. But I knew one thing for certain. Louis and Becky were not going to keep ruining Christmas. I went to bed with that thought echoing in my head, stronger than any carol, stronger than any prayer. This year will be different. This year, something has to change. And that was the start of everything that followed. The morning after that Christmas blow-up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. My house was quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of peace I wanted. It felt empty, heavy. I looked around at the leftovers sitting on the counter, the rolls that nobody touched, the pie with one slice missing. And I thought, why do I keep doing this to myself? Most of my days are simple. I live on a fixed income, so I have a routine that doesn't leave much room for extras. I clip coupons from the paper. I make a grocery list, and I stretch every dollar. I don't need much for myself. Cereal, milk, bread, peanut butter, a few vegetables, maybe chicken if it's on sale. I pay my bills first. Electric, water, medicine, and whatever is left has to last until the next check. I keep busy in my own way. On Mondays, I usually do laundry and clean out the fridge. On Wednesdays, I drive over to the quilting circle at church. That's one of the few things I still look forward to. We don't just quilt. We talk, laugh, share old stories, and swap recipes. On Sundays after service, there's always a church potluck. Those afternoons remind me I'm not alone, that other women my age know what it's like to hold a family together when nobody else seems to care. But December is always different. December is when I start pulling down the Christmas boxes from the closet. I dust off the ornaments Harold and I collected over the years. I set up the nativity he carved by hand. I iron the tablecloth I only use once a year. I do all of this with the hope that Christmas will bring us together, that it will feel like family again. And every single year for the past 3 years, I've ended up disappointed. The first year, it fell apart. I told myself it was just stress. Becky made a scene about the gifts. I had spent weeks shopping for the grandkids, trying to be fair, but she stood right in my living room and accused me of favoring Sharon's children. "It's obvious," she said. "You spent more on them." Louis backed her up, saying I'd always had favorites. I wanted to defend myself, but my throat closed up. The kids sat frozen, holding their unopened presents. Before I knew it, Becky grabbed her coat, told the kids to put their shoes on, and stormed out. The wrapping paper was still on the floor when they left. The second year was no better. Louis and Becky were late again, and by the time they walked in, everyone was tense. I tried to make the best of it, reheating the food and setting the table again. But halfway through dinner, Louis asked me in front of everyone if I could lend them money. Thousands of dollars. I shook my head and said gently, "Son, I don't have it. I'm on a fixed income." He didn't like that answer. He said I'd rather spend on Sharon than help him. His face turned red, and he pushed his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. He stormed out, slamming the door. Sharon's kids were crying, and the meal ended right there. The third year was supposed to be better. I thought maybe we turned a corner. I baked pies from scratch, spent days cleaning the house, and tried to keep everything just right. But Becky walked in and started criticizing everything the moment she saw it. She called the ham dry, said the green bean casserole was too heavy, and even told the kids not to eat much of it. Then she laughed at the pies, saying, "Oh, store-bought again." My hands shook when I told her I had baked them myself. By dessert, she packed up her children and left. The sound of the door closing behind her is something I'll never forget. Each year, I cleaned up the mess alone. The dirty dishes, the spilled drinks, the empty chairs. I stood there wondering why I kept hosting when it only brought me pain. I told myself it was for the grandchildren because I wanted them to have memories of Christmas with their grandmother. I thought maybe if I kept trying, eventually it would be different. But last year showed me the truth. No matter how much love I poured into that holiday, Louis and Becky would find a way to tear it down. The shouting, the slammed doors, the insults had become part of my Christmas. And the hardest part was realizing that I let it happen. I opened the door. I set the table. I made space for their chaos year after year. That morning, looking at the cold coffee in my cup and the leftovers nobody wanted, I admitted to myself that Christmas wasn't bringing me joy anymore. It was breaking me down. What used to be my favorite time of year had turned into the day I dreaded most. And yet deep inside, I also knew something had to give. I couldn't face another holiday like that. I thought of Sharon, who never complained, who always showed up to help, who held her tongue when Louis and Becky exploded. She deserved better, too. My grandchildren deserved laughter and warmth, not tension and tears. And I deserved peace. But how do you undo a tradition that's been in place for decades? How do you tell your own child that you can't keep hosting because their behavior has poisoned the day? Those were the questions I carried with me as I folded laundry, cooked simple meals, and sat in church pews through the weeks that followed. I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew this: Christmas couldn't go on the same way again. Not in my house, not under my roof. I want you to really think about this. How many of us women have stood alone in a kitchen after everyone else walked out, asking ourselves why we keep doing it? If you've been there, share this video because too many of us carry that same burden in silence. As the weeks rolled closer to December, I kept telling myself I might do things differently this year. Maybe I'd skip hosting altogether. Maybe I'd join the church potluck instead. Sit at a table with friends and neighbors where there wouldn't be any shouting. The thought of it felt lighter, easier, but habit is a hard thing to break. For years, my home had been the place where Christmas happened. The kids expected it, Sharon expected it, and even Louis expected it, though he never showed me gratitude. That history sat heavy on my shoulders. I thought about my grandchildren waking up on Christmas morning without the smell of ham in the oven or the sight of stockings hung in my living room, and guilt crept back in. So one afternoon, I sat down at my kitchen table with a stack of envelopes. I wrote out invitations like I always had. Even though my hand shook as I wrote Louis and Becky's names, Sharon's was easy. She always came with a smile, a casserole, and open hands ready to help. But sealing the envelope for Louis felt like I was signing myself up for another round of misery. Still, I slipped the stamp on and dropped them all in the mailbox. The minute the lid slammed shut, regret washed over me. I knew what was coming. I knew I'd set myself up again. I stood in the driveway for a while, the cold air biting at my face, and thought, why do I keep inviting trouble into my own home? But by then, the envelopes were gone, and there was no turning back. The next week, I drove to the lot on the edge of town to buy a Christmas tree. The smaller ones were cheaper, but I ended up picking one a little taller, just like Harold always liked. I tied it to the roof of the car myself and struggled to drag it into the house. By the time I got it into the stand, my back ached and my hands were sticky with sap. I sat down on the couch, staring at the bare branches, and asked myself if it was worth the effort, but I couldn't bring myself to leave it empty. I opened the old boxes from the closet. The same ornaments we'd used for decades stared back at me. Faded bulbs, crocheted angels, a paper snowflake Sharon made in second grade. I hung each one carefully, even though part of me wondered if I was decorating for a celebration or a fight. When I got to the last box, I found the nativity set Harold carved by hand. He had whittled each figure out of wood in the winter after our first child was born. I still remember the sound of the knife on the wood late at night and the pride on his face when he set them up on the mantel. For years, it was the centerpiece of our Christmas. I placed Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus on the mantel first. Then I added the shepherds, the wise men, and the little donkey with the uneven legs. I stood back and looked at it, but instead of feeling peace, I felt the tension rising inside me. That set had always been a symbol of love and calm, but now it looked like a reminder of everything I had lost. Harold was gone, the peace was gone, and all I could feel was the dread of what would come once Louis and Becky walked through my door. A few days later, Sharon called to confirm. "We'll be there early, Mom," she said. "I'll bring the sweet potatoes." Her steady voice was a comfort. I knew she'd be there no matter what. Then Louis texted. His message was short, like always. "We'll come. Becky wants turkey instead of ham. Can you do that?" I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. I'd already bought the ham. I thought about replying that no, I couldn't change the menu, but instead I just set the phone down and didn't answer. I knew the text meant the same thing it always did. They were coming, and they'd bring their arguments with them. That night, I sat in the glow of the tree lights, thinking about the years gone by. Christmas used to be my favorite time. Harold and I would put on records, drink cocoa, and laugh as the kids tore into their presents. The house had been full of warmth. Now it was full of tension I couldn't shake. Still, I tried to cling to the tradition. I wrapped the gifts I'd managed to buy on my tight budget. I hung stockings with each grandchild's name. I baked cookies and tucked them into tins. I did everything I could to make it feel like Christmas, hoping maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. But in the quiet of the night, when the lights were off and the house was still, a knot sat in my stomach. Deep down, I knew the moment Louis and Becky walked in, the tension would return. No amount of ornaments or cookies could cover it. And yet I pressed forward because part of me wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. As Christmas drew closer, the small knot in my stomach grew tighter. The tree stood shining in the corner. The nativity was set out on the mantel, and the gifts were wrapped and tucked under the branches. From the outside, everything looked ready. But inside, I was bracing myself. It didn't take long for Becky to start in a week before Christmas. My phone buzzed with a long text from her. She didn't even say hello. She just wrote, "The kids don't like ham. Can you do turkey this year? Also, can you make more side dishes? Maybe macaroni and cheese? And don't forget, they like those brand name rolls, not the store brand. And please, no cranberry sauce. Nobody eats it." I stared at the screen, reading her list of demands. My chest tightened. I had already bought the ham. I had picked up the rolls that were on sale. I had spent hours planning around what I could afford. Now she wanted me to throw that aside like it meant nothing. I set the phone down and didn't reply right away. Later that evening, I typed a short message. "I already have the ham. That's what I'll be making." Her answer came quick. "Fine, but don't expect the kids to eat it." I sat in the quiet, holding my phone, and wondered why my son married a woman who treated me like the hired help instead of his mother. But then I reminded myself, Louis doesn't stop her. He never has. 2 days later, Louis called. He didn't ask how I was feeling or how the holiday prep was going. He just started talking about gifts. "Mom," he said, "can you get the kids those new gaming systems? They're on sale now. It would mean a lot." I felt my throat tighten. "Louis," I said, "I can't afford that. Those systems cost hundreds of dollars. I live on my Social Security check. I don't have that kind of money." He sighed into the phone like I was letting him down. "Come on, Mom, it's Christmas. You only live once." The kids would be thrilled. I rubbed my forehead, feeling the headache building. "I've already bought gifts," I told him. "Books, puzzles, warm sweaters, things they can actually use." "I did my best with what I have." His tone turned sharp. "You always do this. You act like Sharon's kids are easier to buy for, but you never think about mine. Do you want them to feel left out?" I sat in silence, gripping the phone. There it was again. His way of twisting things, making me feel guilty for not having what I didn't have to give. My heart pounded, and I thought about what my doctor told me last month at my checkup. "Kimberly," he said, "your blood pressure is too high. You need to find ways to reduce stress. If you keep pushing yourself, you're putting your health at risk." I thought about that warning as Louis kept talking, listing things the kids wanted, rattling off prices like he was reading a catalog. Finally, I cut him off. "Louis," I said firmly, "I've done what I can. That's all there is." He went quiet for a moment, then muttered, "Fine, do whatever you want," and hung up. I sat there staring at the phone, my hands trembling. For years, I had stretched my budget to make sure those kids had shoes, coats, and school supplies. I had skipped things for myself so I could make their lives easier. And still, it wasn't enough. It never was. That evening, my neighbor Doris came over. She saw me sitting on the porch looking worn down. She handed me a plate of cookies and sat beside me. "You look tired, Kimberly," she said gently. "What's going on?" I told her about Becky's texts, Louis's demands, and how every year I felt more like a servant than a mother. I told her about my doctor's warning and how the stress was eating me up inside. She listened, nodding, then laid her hand on mine. "You don't have to keep sacrificing your peace for tradition," she said. "You raised your children. You've done your part. If they want to fight, let them fight somewhere else. You don't have to open your door to it." Her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Part of me wanted to argue. Part of me wanted to say, "But it's Christmas. I have to host. It's what we've always done." But another part of me, quieter, deeper, knew she was right. That night after Doris went home, I sat in my living room with only the glow of the Christmas tree for light. I looked at the ornaments, each one tied to a memory. Sharon's paper snowflake, Louis's clay reindeer with the crooked antlers. The angel Harold bought me the year we couldn't afford anything else. All those memories pressed against the silence, and for the first time I let myself imagine it. What if I didn't host at all? What if Christmas came and I didn't open my door to the shouting, the demands, the guilt? What if I spent the day at the church potluck, surrounded by laughter and hymns, instead of clenched jaws and slammed doors? The thought scared me. It felt like giving up on my family. but it also felt like breathing for the first time in years. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding in my chest, and whispered to myself, "Something has to change." After Doris left that night, her words wouldn't leave me. "You don't have to keep sacrificing your peace for tradition." I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the old clock tick. I kept replaying her advice in my head. For years, I'd been the one who tried to hold the family together. But maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to anymore. The next morning, I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper. I wrote at the top, "What are my choices?" Then I listed them out. Option 1, let Sharon host Christmas. She had a bigger house than I did, and she was always willing to help. But I knew what would happen. Louis and Becky would show up, bring their tension with them, and ruin Sharon's day the same way they ruined mine. I didn't want to dump the burden on her shoulders. Option 2, skip hosting completely and spend the holiday at the church potluck. Every year, the church opened its doors, and people who didn't have family nearby or who wanted company would gather. I'd been before once after Harold passed. It was simple, folding tables, paper plates, and a lot of casseroles. But there was laughter, singing, and peace. That sounded more like Christmas than what I'd been living through lately. Option 3, do nothing at all. No tree, no meal, no gathering. Just sit at home with a simple dinner and let the holiday pass quietly. The thought stung. I couldn't remember a Christmas without family around. But there was also something appealing about the quiet. I set the pen down and looked at the list. None of the options were perfect, but they were real. For the first time, I realized I actually had a choice. Later that day, Louis called again. His voice was casual, like nothing had happened the last time we spoke. "Hey, Mom," he said, "I've been thinking. Maybe you can get the kids those new phones instead. They're cheaper than the gaming system, and Becky says the kids really need them." I gripped the phone tighter. I took a deep breath before I answered. "Louis," I said slowly, "I can't. I've already told you. I don't have that kind of money. I bought gifts I can afford. Books, puzzles, clothes. That's what they're getting." He chuckled under his breath. "Mom, come on. You've always figured things out. You spoil Sharon's kids. Why can't you do the same for mine? Don't you want them to feel included?" That word included hit me like a slap. I'd spent years covering for them. I'd bought shoes when theirs wore out. I'd filled their fridge with groceries when the cupboards were bare. I'd taken the grandkids shopping for school supplies when Becky said she didn't have time. I had given until my wallet was empty. And still, Louis acted like it was never enough. "Louis," I said firmly, "I can't and I won't. Please don't ask me again." The silence on the other end stretched for a moment. Then he sighed, his voice full of irritation. "Fine, do whatever you want. Just don't be surprised when the kids are disappointed." And with that, he hung up. I sat there staring at the phone, my heart pounding. The old guilt crept in. Was I really letting the grandchildren down? But then another thought came louder this time. I raised Louis, but I won't raise his temper too. That sentence stuck to me like glue. I had done my job. I had raised my son into adulthood. His choices, his attitude, his behavior, they were his responsibility now, not mine. That evening, I called Sharon. I told her what had happened, about the gifts, about the way Louis dismissed me. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Mom, you don't have to keep bending over backwards. You've done more than enough. If it comes to it, we'll do Christmas here. I'll make the ham. You just come and enjoy it." Her words made my eyes well up. Sharon had always been the steady one. She wasn't asking me to give more. She was offering me rest. After we hung up, I sat in my chair with the lights from the tree reflecting in the window. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I wasn't trapped. I had options. I could say no. I could step back. I didn't know yet which path I'd take. But deep inside, I knew something was shifting. The weight I'd been carrying all these years wasn't mine to hold anymore. I had kept quiet for too long, thinking it was my duty to keep the peace. But peace had never come. I whispered into the quiet of the room, almost as if I was talking to Harold. This year, something has to change. And for the first time, I meant it. Christmas Eve came. And from the moment I woke up, I could feel the tension pressing on my chest. The house looked beautiful. The tree lit in the corner, the table set with my best dishes, the ham resting in the oven. Sharon had come early, like she always did, and she helped mash potatoes and pour drinks. Her presence calmed me, but deep down I was bracing myself for the storm I knew was coming. By 6 Louis and Becky still weren't there. The rolls had gone cold, and Sharon's children were fidgeting in their seats, asking when dinner would start. I tried to keep things cheerful, but my eyes kept drifting to the clock. At 6:30 I finally heard the front door swing open. They came in already at each other's throats. Becky's voice was sharp, complaining about the traffic, and Louis snapped back that she was the reason they were late. Their coats weren't even off before the argument spilled into my living room. The grandchildren followed behind, eyes down, embarrassed. Sharon gave me a look, her lips pressed tight. We both knew it was starting all over again. We sat down anyway. I tried to say grace, but halfway through, Becky sighed loudly and muttered, "This again?" My hand froze over the serving spoon. She didn't stop there. "I told you the kids don't like ham. And what is this?" She pointed at the green beans. "Nobody eats this. Couldn't you just make something normal?" I felt the heat rise in my face, but I kept my voice calm. "Becky, this is what I prepared. You're welcome to eat what you like." Louis leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "See, this is what I mean. You never listen. You've been doing things your way for years, Mom. You always side with Sharon. You never care about what we want." Sharon set her fork down slowly, shaking her head. "Louis, that's not fair." But he wasn't listening. His voice grew louder, angrier. "Every year it's the same. You act like we should be grateful for scraps. You don't care about my kids the way you care about hers." The room went still. The grandchildren sat frozen, eyes wide. I looked at Louis, my son, the boy I raised, and I didn't recognize him. My hands trembled as I gripped the table, and then something inside me snapped. I slammed my hand down so hard the silverware rattled. "Enough!" My voice came out stronger than I expected. "Get out of my house, both of you, right now." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Becky's mouth dropped open. Louis's face turned red. Sharon stared at me in shock. Louis pushed back his chair. "Fine. If that's how you feel, we're leaving." "Come on, Becky!" They grabbed their coats and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the wreath shook. The sound echoed through the house long after they were gone. I sat back down slowly, my hand still on the table. Sharon looked at me, eyes wide, and the kids stared silently at their plates. I should have felt relief. I should have felt like I'd won something by finally standing up for myself. But all I felt was emptiness. I looked around the room, the ham untouched on the table, the rolls growing colder, the pies lined neatly on the counter, the tree glowing in the corner, ornaments shining. But instead of joy, it looked like a stage set for a play no one wanted to watch. My eyes drifted to the mantel, to the nativity Harold had carved. The wooden figures stood there quietly, reminders of the peace this season was supposed to bring. But all I could feel was the weight of years of fights, slammed doors, and broken traditions. I took a deep breath and said quietly but firmly, "Christmas is canceled. I'm done with this house." Sharon blinked as if she hadn't heard me right. "Mom, what do you mean?" I looked at her, my voice steady. "I can't do this anymore. This house isn't a home anymore. It's just a place for their fights. I won't spend another holiday like this. I'm selling it." The room went silent. Sharon's mouth opened, then closed. The kids looked confused, but I felt calm, clearer than I had in years. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat at my computer. My hands didn't shake as I typed in real estate agents near me. I clicked on the first name that came up and filled out the form to request a call. When I hit submit, a wave of relief washed over me. I walked into the living room one last time before bed. The tree lights glowed softly. The gifts still piled underneath. I should have felt sad, but I didn't. I looked at the nativity, at the donkey with its uneven legs, and whispered, "Harold, I think it's time." For the first time in years, I didn't dread what came next. I felt ready to let go of the house, ready to let go of the chaos, ready to start fresh. Christmas was over, but something else had begun. Some of you will say, I went too far. Others will say, I didn't go far enough. But I want you to answer honestly. Would you have sold the house? Hit like if you would have done the same, or comment if you think I overreacted. Either way, don't just scroll past this. Be part of the conversation. The morning after Christmas, I woke up early. The house was silent, but not in a comforting way. The leftovers still sat in the fridge. The gifts were untouched under the tree, and the dining table looked frozen in time, plates still on it from the night before. I made a cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and finally looked at my phone. There were 6 texts from Louis, one after another. "You embarrassed us in front of the kids. You've always taken Sharon's side. You ruined Christmas. Don't expect us to come back next year. And the last one, you'll regret this." I set the phone down. I didn't reply. I had spent years answering his accusations, defending myself, trying to explain. I wasn't going to do it anymore. When I logged onto Facebook, Becky's posts were already there for everyone to see. She had written, "Some people care more about appearances than family. Sad when a grandmother can't make room for her own son and grandkids at Christmas." Comments from her friends piled underneath. People who didn't know me called me selfish, telling her she deserved better. My stomach turned, but I closed the app and set the phone aside. I wasn't going to live my life through her drama. At 9 sharp, the doorbell rang. A young real estate agent stood on the porch, smiling with a clipboard in her hand. "Mrs. Page, you requested a visit last night?" I nodded. "Yes, I did. Come on in." She walked through the house, asking questions about square footage, roof repairs, and the age of the furnace. I answered calmly, showing her each room, each corner I had scrubbed and maintained over the years. It felt strange to lead a stranger through spaces that had once been so full of meaning. When we stepped outside, she tucked her pen into her folder. "I'll prepare the paperwork this week. In the meantime, we'll put the sign up." And just like that, she slid a bright red and white for sale sign into my yard. I stood on the porch watching it sink into the ground. For a moment I thought my knees might give out. But instead of sadness, what I felt was relief. It was like a weight sliding off my shoulders. That afternoon, Sharon came by. She pulled into the driveway, stepped out of her car, and stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the sign. "Mom," she said slowly. "What is this?" I folded my arms, bracing for her reaction. "It's what I decided. I'm selling the house." She hurried up the walk, her face full of disbelief. "Mom, you can't sell the family home because of one fight." I met her eyes steadily. "It wasn't one fight, Sharon. It was the last fight. Every year it's been the same. This house isn't a home anymore. It's a stage for their drama. Your father and I built it for peace, and the peace is gone." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Finally she sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I just don't want you to make a decision you'll regret." "I won't regret it," I said firmly. "I've lived here long enough to know when it's time. And it's time." We went inside, and I pulled out a stack of cardboard boxes I had picked up from the grocery store. Sharon watched as I opened the first one and began packing books from the shelf. My hands were steady. I wasn't shaking. "Mom," she said softly, "are you really sure?" I placed the books neatly in the box and taped it shut. "Yes, I don't feel guilt. I feel free." For the rest of the afternoon, I filled box after box, old photo albums, framed pictures, quilts folded carefully, Harold's tools from the garage. Each item I wrapped and set aside felt like closing a chapter. There were moments of memory, holidays when the house was full of laughter, birthdays when balloons covered the ceiling. But even those memories had been buried under years of tension. I took down the stockings from the mantel, folded the tablecloth, and carefully wrapped the nativity figures Harold had carved. As I placed them in a box, I whispered to myself, "This goes with me. The peace comes with me." When Sharon left that evening, she hugged me tightly. "If this is what you want, Mom, then I'll support you." After she drove away, I sat on the couch with the tree still glowing in the corner. I should have felt heartache, but instead I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. The house wasn't mine to carry anymore. It was just walls and a roof. The real home was wherever I chose to make it. And for the first time, I was choosing peace. A few weeks passed after the for sale sign went up. Winter settled deep into Springfield, and the snow lined the streets like a heavy blanket. The house looked the same from the outside, but to me, it already felt different. Every box I filled reminded me I was one step closer to being free of the weight that had crushed me for so long. I'd gotten used to the quiet. My phone buzzed with the occasional message from Sharon, but nothing from Louis, not a word. I figured he was still angry, and honestly, I was fine with the silence. I thought maybe that was the end of it, that I could move forward and let him live his life while I lived mine. Then one cold Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer when I saw Louis's name on the screen. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but something in me said, "Pick it up." "Mom!" His voice cracked through the line. He sounded panicked, not angry. "It's Becky. She's in the hospital. She collapsed at work. They said it might be her heart." I froze, clutching the phone tighter. "What happened?" "They're running tests. They said she needs to stay for at least a few days, maybe longer. I don't know what to do. The kids, Mom, I can't handle this by myself. Can you help?" For a moment, I didn't say anything. The old me would have jumped in without thinking, dropping everything to rescue him. But the new me, the woman who had drawn her line in the sand, took a breath before answering. "I'll help with the kids," I said slowly, "but only on my terms. I'm not moving back in, Louis. I'll come by after school. I'll make sure they're fed and I'll keep them steady. But I go home to my place at night. You understand?" He was quiet, then finally said, "Fine. I just can't do this without you." That night, I drove to their house for the first time since Christmas. The kids came running to the door. Sophie, the oldest, had dark circles under her eyes. Dylan's hair stuck up like he hadn't brushed it in days. Caleb and little Elsie clung to me like they had been waiting for me to appear. The house was a mess. Dirty dishes piled high. Laundry scattered across the floor. Backpacks dumped by the door. Louis paced the living room, looking lost. "I don't know what to do, Mom," he admitted. "I work all day and Becky, she usually handles this stuff." I took a deep breath. "We'll get through it, but listen to me carefully. I'm not doing everything for you. The kids are old enough to help, and you're their father. You have to step up too." That evening, I made a simple dinner of pasta and green beans. While it cooked, I gathered the children around the table. "Here's how this is going to work," I said. "Sophie, you're in charge of making sure homework gets done. Dylan, you'll handle trash and laundry. Caleb, you'll set the table. Elsie, you can help pick up toys. Everyone has a part." At first they looked unsure, but when we started, something shifted. Sophie took her role seriously, checking her brother's assignments. Dylan grumbled about folding clothes, but he did it. Caleb carefully lined up the forks and napkins, proud of himself. Even little Elsie hummed while she picked up crayons and put them back in the box. When the pasta was ready, I served it and sat down with them. They ate quietly at first, then started talking about school, about friends, about Becky in the hospital. I listened, nodding, letting them feel heard. After dinner, I showed Dylan how to load the dishwasher. "Not too much soap," I said, handing him the bottle. He looked at me with a small smile, proud that he could do it himself. By 9, I gathered my purse. Louis looked at me, tired. "You're leaving?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I told you I'm not moving back in. I'll be here after school tomorrow, but tonight I sleep in my own bed." He nodded reluctantly. I kissed the kids goodnight and drove home. For the first time in years, I didn't feel drained. I felt balanced. The next few days followed the same rhythm. Arrived after school, helped with dinner, guided the kids through chores, then went home at night. Each day, they grew more confident. Sophie cooked scrambled eggs one evening all by herself. Dylan started doing laundry without being asked. Caleb learned how to sweep the floor, humming as he worked. Elsie began setting the table with a little flourish, adding napkins folded into triangles. They weren't perfect. Sometimes the eggs burned. Sometimes socks got mixed up. But they were learning, and for the first time, they weren't just depending on me. They were learning to depend on themselves. Louis still looked overwhelmed, but even he started to change. I caught him one evening helping Dylan fold towels. Another night, he read a story to Elsie before bed. They were small steps, but steps nonetheless. At the end of the week, I sat in my car outside my house, holding the steering wheel, and thought about everything that had happened. I wasn't the rescuer anymore. I wasn't the maid, the cook, or the one holding the entire family together. I was a mentor guiding them, showing them what they could do for themselves. I whispered into the quiet car, "This is how it should have been all along." The days turned into weeks, and before I knew it, helping at Louis's house became a rhythm. But it wasn't like before. I wasn't living there. I wasn't sacrificing myself. I had drawn my line and I was sticking to it. Every afternoon after school, I drove over, made sure the kids were fed, and helped keep things moving. By 9, I gathered my purse and went home. That boundary never shifted, not once. In the past, I had done everything, cooking, cleaning, washing, tucking the kids into bed, while Louis and Becky drifted in and out. But now things were different. I didn't do for them what they could do for themselves. Instead, I started teaching. Sophie, being the oldest, was ready to learn more than anyone gave her credit for. One evening I showed her how to roast chicken. She peeled carrots, washed potatoes, and learned how to season everything without overdoing it. She stood straighter when she carried the platter to the table, proud of herself. Later, she said quietly, "Grandma, I didn't know I could do that." I smiled and told her, "You can do a lot more than you think." Dylan took on the laundry. At first, he tossed everything in one load: whites, colors, towels. We pulled the clothes out later, and half of them had turned pink. He looked horrified. I laughed softly and said, "That's how we learn. Next time you'll sort them." Sure enough, the next week he called me over proudly to show me neat stacks of folded shirts. Caleb became the table setter and sweeper. It didn't sound like much, but he took it seriously. He lined up forks evenly, folded napkins into triangles, and swept under the table after dinner. Once he even told his brother, "Grandma says this is my job, so you can't take it." I let him have that small victory, and Elsie, my youngest grandchild, became the toy organizer. She learned how to put her crayons in boxes, her dolls on the shelf, and her shoes by the door. She liked having something that was hers to control, and I made sure to praise her for it. The more responsibility they took on, the more I saw them grow. They weren't helpless. They weren't fragile. They just needed someone to expect more of them. Louie and Becky never asked much. They either did everything themselves or left it all to me. But children rise when you believe they can. Meanwhile, I started getting my own life back. On Thursdays, I rejoined the quilting circle at church. The first night, I walked in with my fabric bag. The other women clapped and said, "Welcome back, Kimberly." I hadn't realized how much I missed it. The chatter, the laughter, the rhythm of stitching. For once, I wasn't rushing home to fix someone else's dinner. On Saturday mornings, I joined the walking club at the park. At first, my legs ached after just one lap, but Doris encouraged me. "Keep going," she said. "You'll get stronger." And I did. The air felt fresh, the conversation light, and I felt my body waking up again after years of sitting tired at the end of long babysitting days. I even found time to volunteer at the senior center as a desk aide. It wasn't a big job answering phones and greeting visitors, but it gave me a sense of purpose. I met people, heard their stories, and felt useful in a way that didn't drain me. I balanced these things carefully with my time helping the kids. And because I had balance, I didn't feel resentful. When I cooked with Sophie, it was joyful. When I showed Dylan how to fold towels, it was patient. When I swept the kitchen with Caleb and organized toys with Elsie, it felt like love, not duty. Louis, for his part, was quieter than usual. Sometimes he would watch me teach the kids, and I could see something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or realization. He didn't say much, but I noticed he started doing more himself. One evening, I walked in and saw him helping Sophie with homework. Another night, he had a load of laundry going before I even arrived. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. One evening, as I was leaving, Sophie walked me to the door. "Grandma," she said softly, "thank you for teaching us. I feel like we're a team now." I hugged her, my throat tight, and whispered, "That's all I wanted, sweetheart." Driving home that night, I thought about everything. For years, I thought love meant giving everything until there was nothing left for me. I thought being a good mother and grandmother meant absorbing every burden. But sitting behind the wheel with the quiet hum of the road, I realized something else. "I'm showing them love without surrendering myself," I said out loud. And it was true. That balance was new. And it wasn't easy, but it felt right. I wasn't their rescuer anymore. I was their guide, and in guiding them, I had found my strength again. Spring came, and with it the final papers for the house sale. I stood on the porch one last time, looking over the yard Harold and I had worked on together. The grass was just starting to turn green, and the old maple tree out front was budding. For a moment, my chest tightened. This had been my home for decades, the place where my children grew up, the place where Harold and I shared our lives. But then I remembered Christmas Eve, the shouting, the slammed door, the tension that had hung heavy over every holiday for years. That memory made it easier to turn the key, lock the door, and hand it over to the new owners. I moved into a smaller place on the other side of town. A little 2-bedroom apartment, cozy and manageable. No creaky stairs, no big yard to maintain, no dining room table large enough to hold fights, just enough space for me and room for the grandchildren when they visited. At first it felt strange. I'd sit in the evenings with my cup of tea and notice how quiet it was. But over time, I grew to love it. I decorated it the way I wanted, with my quilts on the walls and a few framed pictures of Harold on the shelf. I planted geraniums in pots for the balcony. I finally felt like the space was mine, not a stage for anyone else's drama. The next Christmas was the real test. Sharon called early in December. "Mom, what do you want to do this year?" she asked. I smiled into the phone. Something small, something peaceful. And that's exactly what we did. Sharon and her family came. Doris brought her cranberry salad like she always does. I made a smaller meal, roast chicken instead of a ham big enough to feed a crowd. We set the table with simple dishes, and the grandchildren helped light candles. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy, but it was peaceful. We ate, laughed, played a board game, and ended the night singing carols softly while Doris tapped along. It was the kind of Christmas I hadn't had in years. Louis and Becky weren't there. I had told them clearly they were welcome only if they could respect the boundaries. No shouting, no demands, no treating my house like a battlefield. They didn't come, and I didn't chase them. That was their choice. I no longer felt guilty about it. After dinner, Sophie helped me wash dishes, and Dylan showed me the book he'd been reading for school. Caleb and Elsie curled up on the couch with Doris, giggling as she told them a story about her childhood. I sat back for a moment, taking it all in. My living room was filled with laughter, not tension, with warmth, not anger. It hit me then that I had done the right thing. Selling the house hadn't been about giving up. It had been about letting go of years of pain and reclaiming my peace. Looking back, I realized something important. Traditions are only worth keeping if they bring joy. If they bring dread, then it's okay to change them. I had clung to that old house because I thought it was my duty, but really my duty was to myself and the people who respected me. I know some people will say I overreacted, that I should have just kicked Louis and Becky out and stayed in the house, that I gave up too much. And maybe for them, that would have been the choice. But for me, staying would have meant reliving the same misery year after year. Selling wasn't just about a building. It was about saying no more. So now I'll ask you, would you have done what I did, canceled Christmas and sold the house, or would you have stayed put for tradition's sake? Tell me in the comments, because I know many of you have faced the same kind of decision in your own way. For me, selling the house wasn't about leaving. It was about finally choosing peace. If my story made you think, if it reminded you of your own struggles, I'd love for you to share it. And if you believe women like us deserve to protect our peace, go ahead and hit like, share this with someone who might need it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for listening to mine.